data engineer, data analyst, and data scientist. These are the three most rapidly growing jobs today. So in this video, let me explain what is the crucial difference between a data engineer, a data analyst, and a data scientist. I'll also explain what are the skills required to get into these professions, what kind of career path exists in these three tracks, what is the typical salary, and my experience of doing all of these three things. Let's go in. All right, let's sit for this. And as I have got a lot of things to cover, I thought it will be easier if we have some rules. So when I'm talking about being a data engineer, I'll try to wear this hat or whatever this is. And when I'm talking about being or doing stuff as a data scientist, I'll wear these glasses. And when I'm not wearing either of these, then I'm explaining the data analyst perspective of things. Make sense? Let's go. So our first topic is what is it that they do? As a data engineer, your primary goal is to basically get the data into a place. So the main technical term that data engineers use here is ETL, extract, transform, load. Essentially, think of data engineer as a person in the organization who is responsible for kind of collating and maintaining the data. So she would be, for example, collecting all the data that is generated by various systems, apply some principles to clean the data using various business rules or concepts, then synthesize the data. For example, maybe you have two different systems, one for CRM and another for maintaining the orders or whatever. So connecting these two data points so that they can tell a single story, and maintaining that data in an infrastructure and optimizing that entire process so that it is smooth and runs on periodic basis and all of that. So that's what a data engineer would do. Now, when it comes to a data analyst, their primary job is to understand the data and tell stories about the data. So they will be doing a lot of periodic reporting, ad hoc reporting, that is somebody asking you a question about data and answering that question, helping with decision support as and when business needs to make any decisions, whether it is to, for example, extend a particular discount campaign or not. All of those kind of things, the data analyst should be able to support in those decisions. They may also have to build some models and find patterns and insights from the data. And depending on the type of data analysis that is happening, so maybe if you are doing a productivity data analysis, then you will need to put in some specific domain insights into the data analysis as well. Now, when it comes to the data science, it is a multidisciplinary job. The primary job of a data scientist is to look at the data, build some models, test hypotheses, and provide guidance. So, in a way, you can argue that a data analyst looks back at what happened and finds information from that, whereas a data scientist looks forward and provides guidance in that space. But that kind of a definition is also not very correct, because the boundaries between what a data analyst can do and what a data scientist can do are very vaguely defined. And in my opinion, many times there is a lot of crossover too. So this is the reason why I find that the data science profession is much more vaguely defined than the data analyst or data engineer professions. All right, let's understand the skills that you need to be a data engineer, data analyst, or data scientist. Let's start with the data engineering. A data engineer would require the skills in the space of databases and data warehouses. All the data infrastructure they need to know very well. So this means they need to have the solid knowledge of SQL or alternative skills in SQL space. So NoSQL or Power Query are very important. Then they may also need to know a lot of coding skills to build scripts or pipelines or automations that are required to maintain the data infrastructure. They have to work with a lot of APIs many times, so understanding how to use those kind of interfaces is really important. They will also need to know how to work with on-premises technologies versus cloud technologies such as AWS or Azure. On top of it all, they'll need to have solid business knowledge and domain knowledge because you can't maintain the data in an optimum format unless you have good understanding of how your business operates. And for this reason, I find that data engineer is not strictly an entry level profession. So if you're completely new, then getting into a data engineering position will be very hard for you because you do require quite a bit of knowledge and skills and understanding of the business in order to be successful as a data engineer. That brings us to the topic of the skills you need to be a data analyst. And this is where the primary applications, in my opinion, are Microsoft Excel, Tableau, and Power BI. And maybe a little bit of Python and R programming if you can't use these three main tools. Apart from these technologies, you'll also need to have solid written and presentation skills because a data analyst is looking at the data, analyzing it, and then they'll have to go and talk about it or they'll have to explain all of this in writing or emails or documents to others. So that's where those skills are just as important, if not more, to be a successful data analyst. Of course, needless to say, if you want to be a good data analyst, you will also need to have solid business or domain knowledge. But if you don't have very good domain knowledge, that is still fine because you can learn on the job in the data analyst profession. This is where I find that for beginners, data analysis or data analyst profession is an easier choice to break into the industry, get some experience, build the domain knowledge, build the software skills, and then they can transition into some of the other professions if needed. Now let's talk about the skills you need to be a data scientist. The primary skills to be a data scientist are coding skills. You'll need to understand how to use various coding platforms like Python, R, or even some specific languages to build various models, test hypotheses, and work with large volumes of data. You will also need to have a very good foundational knowledge of machine learning and artificial intelligence models in order to be able to work with the data, test some things, and figure out what to do next. Needless to say, you will also need solid knowledge of statistics and mathematics in order to be a successful data scientist. You know, there is a popular joke about data scientists. A data scientist knows more mathematics than a computer engineer and more programming than a statistician. So that's where the intersection of those two things comes in, and you do need the skills across the spectrum to be a successful data scientist. Apart from all of these, a data scientist may also be expected to know a little bit of Excel, Power BI, Tableau, or other software tools that are used for data analysis. This is because the boundary between a data scientist and a data analyst is really thin. So sometimes, even though you are a data scientist, you might be asked to just work with data and make a pivot report. So you will need to know how to use those things.
I can't do that. You can't do that, huh?
Apart from all of these, you'll also need to have very good written and communication skills so that whatever insights or ideas that you're finding in the data, you're able to communicate them to the business users. You will also need to have a very good business understanding to be a successful data scientist.
Business.
Business.
Business?
Business.
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 Business?
Business. Is that all you ever...
Otherwise, if you don't know the business, you will not be able to build correct models that are relevant for your line of work. Now let's talk about the salaries and career progressions for data engineer, data analyst, and data scientist. Let's go to a new location. Okay, so let's talk about the salaries. Oh, wait, I nearly forgot. It's kind of getting hard to keep up with this. But when it comes to the salary of a data engineer, the average salary is between 90 to 110,000 US dollars for a competent data engineer. The salaries might vary a little bit lower if you are a beginner data engineer or you don't have all the skills or you're working in a company that is not known for their pay. On the other hand, a data analyst average salary varies a bit more wildly. So it could be anywhere from 60K to 100K US dollars for a data analyst. The key thing to remember here is when you hear this information, you might think, oh, wait, data engineers get paid more. Maybe I should try to be a data engineer. The fact is, there are actually far fewer data engineers working in companies when you compare with data analysts. This is because data analyst is required for many different aspects of business. So a HR team would require few data analysts to do the HR data analyst. Same with marketing, customer services, production, operations, finance, whatever team you take in the organization, they'll all have one or two data analysts working there. On the other hand, a data engineer, even for a medium to large company, it's quite common to have just a handful of data engineers all working in a centralized team. So, at an absolute number level, you have far fewer data engineers than data analysts. So, even though the salaries are a bit low, there is more opportunities to be a data analyst. And finally, for a data scientist, the average salary is between 100 to 120K US dollars. So you could see from this that the average is a bit higher for engineer and scientists, whereas analyst sits in the middle. But like I explained, there is more data analysts working compared to engineers or even data scientists. Now let's take a look at the pathways for each of these three professions. Let's start with data engineer. A data engineer, like I mentioned, is not strictly an entry-level position. So in all likelihood, you might be transitioning from somewhere else to be a data engineer rather than from college or education to a data engineer. But once you are a data engineer, you have pretty much two career tracks available for you. In fact, that's the same for data analyst and data scientist too. You have two tracks. One is a technical track and another is more of a business/leadership track. And depending on your personal aptitude and likeness for these things, you can go into either one or kind of crossover between. So in a technical track, a data engineer can expect to become a senior engineer, technical architect, or a data architect. They can even become a data scientist or a domain specific technical/business analyst. They can eventually become a data lead and move on to a chief data officer, CIO, or CTO kind of a role. So that's the track. Whereas on the leadership or on the business side, a data engineer can become a business analyst. They can also become a domain or a subject matter expert. They can become a data project manager and eventually become a chief data officer, CIO, or CTO. Like I said, that pathway, the tracks are similar for data analyst and data scientist. It's just that the job titles change. So, for example, a data analyst, the next natural progression for most of them would be a senior data analyst. Then they can become a principal or a lead data analyst. They can also become a data manager or a data team head and eventually get into CTO, CDO, CIO kind of a position. They can also sidetrack and go into other professions, like a data analyst can become a data engineer, or they can also become a business analyst or even a data scientist. Finally, for data scientists, the next natural step would be a senior scientist, a principal/an architect, or a researcher, and then they can also become a data head. They can also sidetrack and go into a data engineering profession, business analyst profession. They can go into more of a senior data analyst kind of positions, or they can go into team management kind of project management roles, or even become research team heads. One of the key things to remember about these three professions is what kind of people you work with and how the actual work looks like. So when it comes to a data engineer or a data scientist professions, both of them tend to be in smaller teams. Again, this comes from my experience of doing these jobs, and I predominantly worked in small to medium-sized companies. But maybe if it is a very large company such as Google or Netflix, you might have a really large data engineering team. But in smaller companies, that's the reality. The data engineers and data scientists are often working in really small teams, but they work along with the business. On the other hand, a data analyst is somebody who works again in smaller teams, but there are more of them spread across the organization. It's just that you are never really called a simple data analyst. You are called as a data analyst for HR or HR analyst, finance analyst, marketing analysts, like that. So you're always tagged with a function or a unit of the business, and you have more of them in the organization. But all of these three professions, predominantly, the work can be thought of as about 60 to 80% of the work you do it yourself, and the remaining is collaboration. If you contrast this with something like a business analyst, it's kind of 50-50. 50% of work you are doing, but other 50% you're collaborating and talking to other people. So if you are somebody who enjoys communicating with others, collaborating with others, then you might find these professions a little bit lonely. On the other hand, if you thrive on that kind of working on your own, then you will really enjoy this. Naturally, you might be thinking, okay, now I know all these three areas. How do I acquire the technical skills to be a engineer, analyst, or the data scientist? I got you. I have a playlist on my channel that covers all the critical data analysis skills. So everything in relation to all the fields of data is covered in that playlist. Check it out here on the screen and watch some of the videos. Alternatively, if you want to know how the data profession, data analyst primarily, differs from the business analyst profession, then check out this video to know more about that. Whatever may be the career choice you want to go for, let me wish you all the very best in your journey. Stay awesome. I'll catch you somewhere else. Bye bye.